Good afternoon, criminal files, and welcome to another episode of Homicide Cases. I'm your host, Misfit, and today I will be opening the file on Joshua Anderson, an American serial killer with four known victims. This comprehensive analysis focuses exclusively on the documented criminal career and pathological behavior of Joshua Anderson, an American serial killer whose violent spree targeted the northern neighborhoods of Tulsa, Oklahoma between late 2006 and early 2007. The subject was born on June 17, 1987, and was approximately 19 years old at the time of his most severe offenses. The case is notable for its compressed timeline, the disorganized nature of the crimes, and the extreme, non utilitarian pathological acts committed against certain victims. Anderson was responsible for the deaths of between 4 and 5 individuals in the Tulsa area. Following his apprehension on February 2, 2007, Anderson was formally convicted on 4 counts of homicide, 1 count of arson, and 1 count of assault with a deadly weapon. These convictions resulted in a cumulative sentence of 4 life terms plus an additional 35 years without parole, ensuring his permanent incarceration within the Oklahoma correctional system. The rapid escalation of Anderson's violence and the unique incorporation of sadism and postmortem mutilation, including necrophagic behavior, elevates his case to a critical subject for forensic criminology study, illustrating the profound and sudden deterioration into high pathology homicidal conduct. Joshua Anderson's background details are sparse in public records, indicating limited official involvement prior to his mid teens, or perhaps a non cooperative family environment. The environment in which he operated played a significant role in enabling his behavior. He resided in close proximity to the eventual homicide scenes, located just north of downtown Tulsa. This area was recognized by authorities as experiencing a pervasive drug problem, a factor which likely influenced the nature and context of several of his later crimes. Socially, Anderson was not anonymous. He was widely known within the neighborhood as the neighborhood bully, a reputation that preceded his homicidal spree and contributed to a general feeling of fear in the local community. This identification as a known aggressor demonstrates a pre existing pattern of dominance and physical intimidation, suggesting that his adult violence was not a sudden onset but the ultimate escalation of long term antisocial behavior. Anderson's documented criminal history commenced in his adolescence, revealing a troubled pattern of immediate escalation towards lethal violence. At the age of 15, he was accused of shooting with intent to kill in Muskogee, Oklahoma. This charge represents a severe marker for future violent risk, yet the warrant for the offense was recalled less than 1 month later. The swift termination of proceedings for such a grave accusation suggests a critical systemic failure in early judicial intervention. Had the legal system pursued this initial charge vigorously, it may have imposed necessary constraints or mandatory mental health evaluations at a pivotal developmental stage. Instead, the rapid dismissal likely reinforced Anderson's burgeoning belief that extreme aggression carried minimal or at least reversible legal risk. This failure of deterrence continued throughout his late adolescence. In June 2005, when Anderson was 17, he faced charges for kidnapping, concealing stolen property, and domestic assault and battery. He received a plea deal resulting in him pleading guilty to the kidnapping and assault counts. However, he served a minimal sentence of just 90 days in jail, and the stolen property charges were dismissed entirely. This brief period of incarceration proved entirely ineffective in altering his behavioral trajectory. Just 1 month after completing this short jail sentence, Anderson was charged with shooting another individual. Once again, the case was dismissed, this time attributed to weak witness testimony. The repeated withdrawal of formal legal consequences for violent acts, including 2 instances of shooting people, cultivated a profound sense of operational impunity. The challenges in securing witness testimony, especially in high crime zones where Anderson was already feared as a neighborhood bully, highlight how environmental factors can insulate violent actors. The cumulative effect of unpunished gun violence and short lived legal repercussions taught Anderson that escalating violence, particularly in response to conflicts, was a low risk strategy. This pattern of learned impunity directly provided the behavioral foundation for his subsequent catastrophic homicide spree that began in 2006. The homicidal activities of Joshua Anderson were characterized by an extraordinarily rapid span of violence, lasting only a few months, from late 2006 to early 2007. Unlike many traditional serial killers who maintain wide geographic dispersion, Anderson's crimes were highly concentrated, all committed within a few blocks of each other in the northern district of Tulsa. This pattern suggests a killer who operated exclusively within his known hunting ground, maximizing familiarity and minimizing travel, characteristic of a localized spree or cluster based serial offender. His victim selection lacked any discernible demographic consistency, demonstrating an opportunistic approach. The subject took the life of victims regardless of their race, age, or gender, suggesting that the unifying factor was circumstance, proximity to Anderson during a time of conflict or instrumental need, rather than specific fantasy selection. At the time of his arrest in early 2007, the intense rate of killing meant that Anderson was responsible for an estimated 1/3 of all homicides recorded in Tulsa for that year, illustrating the severe impact of his localized spree on public safety. Anderson was ultimately convicted of 4 homicides, including Evaristo Tobias Jr., though specific details regarding Tobias's death are less elaborate in the public record than the other confirmed homicides. The violence intensified significantly in January 2007. On January 23rd, 2007, Anderson committed at least one confirmed homicide and one suspected homicide. The confirmed victim, 30-year-old Christopher Meadow, was killed during an interaction relating to drug acquisition. Meadow and Anderson met a drug dealer, and an argument ensued, during which Meadow armed himself with an ice pick. Anderson responded immediately by fatally shooting Meadow with a 22 caliber revolver. The homicide was impulsive and reactive, further demonstrating Anderson's default reliance on lethal force and confrontation. The motive was finalized by the fact that Anderson robbed Meadow of a paltry $3 before fleeing in his brother's car. Later that same day, Anderson shot and killed 26-year-old David Gilbert. Witnesses linked Anderson to the killing, indicating the motive was revenge stemming from a prior altercation between the two men. Although Gilbert is often included in the tally of 4 to 5 victims, Anderson was never formally charged in Gilbert's death due to insufficient evidence. This sequence, killing 2 people in separate, unconnected incidences on the same day, one over a minuscule sum of money and the other over retaliation, demonstrates a complete collapse of internal controls. Violence has become the exclusive and immediate solution for both instrumental and expressive aims, confirming a heightened state of lethal impulsive rage. The most infamous and pathologically revealing offenses occurred on February 2nd, 2007, resulting in the death of Herbert Hobbs and his 69-year-old mother, Rosemary Hobbs. This incident illustrates the full scope of Anderson's capabilities for instrumental planning, sadistic expression, and profound mental deviance. The crime began instrumentally as Anderson, armed with his revolver, entered the Hobbs home with the specific intention of robbery. He successfully restrained both Herbert and Rosemary and stole $300. The incident then shifted from a goal-directed offense to a predatory expressive homicide. Anderson initially left the residence, but eventually made the calculated decision to return because the victims had seen his face, demonstrating rational instrumental planning aimed at eliminating witnesses. Upon his return, the violence rapidly escalated into acts of profound sexual degradation and sadism. Although the victims had managed to free themselves, Anderson used the threat of the revolver to regain control. He then forced Herbert and Rosemary to engage in sexual acts with each other before executing them both by shooting. The compulsion to enforce sexual humiliation and maximize psychological torture before death is a defining characteristic of sexual sadism and reveals that the homicidal act was driven by complex pathological needs far beyond the initial desire for $300 or simple witness elimination. Following the homicides, Anderson committed an act of extreme post-mortem mutilation and necrophagic behavior by eating part of Rosemary's brain. Cannibalism is exceptionally rare in homicide and is generally indicative of severe mental disorganization, psychotic episodes, or a delusional framework wherein the perpetrator attempts to internalize the victim's essence or power. This detail fundamentally distinguishes Anderson's pathology from typical psychopathy, requiring consideration for profound mental illness and severe sexual pathology integrated into the homicidal fantasy. After this horrific act, Anderson attempted to conceal the evidence of the crime by dousing the residence with gasoline and setting it ablaze before fleeing, an instrumental act that resulted in the arson conviction. The concentrated nature of Anderson's spree, combined with the severity of the Hobbs case, rapidly drew investigative resources. Anderson was apprehended on the same day as the final two homicides, February 2nd, 2007. The ensuing interrogation proved immediately fruitful as Anderson confessed soon afterwards to his crimes. This quick confession was a crucial element in securing convictions and provided definitive links between Anderson and a rapidly accumulating body count that had plagued North Tulsa. Anderson's legal disposition involved a dual track: a jury trial for the Hobbs case, followed by a negotiated guilty plea for the remaining homicides, a common strategy employed by defense teams facing overwhelming evidence of multiple capital offenses. The initial jury trial focused on the Hobbs family homicides, the final two killings, and the arson charge. The jury of 12, which was 7 women and 5 men, found Anderson guilty on all charges, completing their deliberation in a remarkably short period of only 2 hours. This verdict resulted in the imposition of 2 life sentences for the homicides, along with an additional 25 years for the arson conviction. The remaining homicide charges, those related to Evaristo Tobias Jr. and Christopher Meadow, were resolved separately. On December 8, 2008, Anderson entered a plea of guilty to those 2 homicides and to the count of assault with a deadly weapon, In exchange for this plea, he received 2 additional life sentences plus a further 10 years of imprisonment. The decision to resolve the final charges through a guilty plea rather than risking a second capital trial was a critical strategic move. Given the extraordinary depravity of the Hobbs case, sadistic degradation, and post-mortem mutilation, Anderson faced a substantial risk of receiving the death penalty under Oklahoma law. By accepting 4 life sentences without the possibility of parole, the defense successfully mitigated the risk of a capital sentence, achieving the functional equivalent of permanent incarceration. The total outcome of the jury verdict and the subsequent plea deal imposed a sentence of 4 life terms, supplemented by an additional 35 years of imprisonment, all without the possibility of parole. This definitive sentence ensures that Anderson will remain incarcerated for the remainder of his life. Anderson is currently classified as incarcerated within the Oklahoma Department of Corrections. He was initially imprisoned at the Joseph Harp Correctional Center and is currently serving his sentences at the Lexington Assessment and Reception Center in Lexington, Oklahoma. Joshua Anderson's homicidal pattern aligns with the criteria for a mixed, disorganized, situational offender, exhibiting characteristics that defy classification within either the purely organized or purely disorganized forensic typology. The majority of the offenses displayed disorganized traits. The victims were selected opportunistically or during reactive situations such as a drug dispute, revenge altercation. The weapon used was a firearm, and the crimes were executed in a highly concentrated geographical area proximate to the offender's residence. The use of impulsive overkill and the highly chaotic nature of the immediate postmortem acts are also hallmarks of a disorganized state. However, the Hobbs family homicides introduced organized elements. The initial intent was the instrumental goal of robbery, and critically, the decision to return to the scene to eliminate witnesses after leaving the house demonstrates a rational, goal directed assessment of risk. The meticulous use of arson to destroy evidence further shows an effort to manage the crime scene and evade detection. Ultimately, Anderson's methodology suggests that while the initial impulse to kill was often reactive and disorganized, his behavior was capable of rational planning when facing immediate threats as far as witness exposure or instrumental needs as far as robbery and evasion, falling squarely into the mixed classification driven by situational factors. The single most distinguishing pathological feature of the Hobbs case is Anderson's act of consuming part of Rosemary Hobbs' brain. This behavior is extremely rare in homicide cases and is generally regarded as an indicator of profound psychological disorganization, which may include clinical psychosis, severe sexual deviance, or underlying delusional beliefs. Cannibalism moves the motive beyond simple sadism, the enforced sexual degradation of the victims, into a sphere of high pathology where the boundary between the self and the victim is dissolved. The act is not instrumental as far as serving as a material goal, but highly expressive, suggesting a desire to incorporate with the victim, perhaps stemming from a delusional need of power, control, or the internalization of the victim's essence. While the court record confirms convictions and sentences, the details of any corresponding forensic psychological evaluations, such as a competency assessment, examination for severe mental illness or intellectual disability, which could potentially trigger protection under Atkins v. Virginia, are not available in the provided public material. A comprehensive forensic profile requires such evaluation data to definitively categorize whether the behavior was driven by primary psychopathy, substance-induced psychosis, or pre-existing severe mental disorder impacting his capacity for rational judgment as described in clinical standards. Regardless of the ultimate diagnosis, the inclusion of necrophagic behavior firmly places Joshua Anderson on the extreme end of homicidal pathology. The forensic analysis of Anderson's history strongly suggests a direct causal relationship between the repeated failure of the judicial system to impose effective sanctions and the dramatic escalation of his violence. The system failed him twice. First, by swiftly recalling the warrant for shooting with intent to kill at age 15, negating a critical opportunity for early, severe intervention, and second, by dismissing a later shooting charge due to weak testimony. This lack of decisive intervention inadvertently reinforced Anderson's pre-existing aggressive tendencies. The short jail sentence for kidnapping and assault also provided insufficient deterrence. This environment of functional impunity, combined with his recognized status as a neighborhood bully, allowed his reactive and antisocial behavioral strategies to become entrenched. The eventual homicide spree, constrained geographically and fueled by drug-related conflicts and personal disputes, was the ultimate consequence of this learned behavior pattern, where lethal force became the established response to any social conflict or perceived threat, rapidly progressing to acts of shocking depravity when fear of consequence was removed. Joshua Anderson represents a complex case study in extreme violence, categorized as a mixed, disorganized serial killer operating under the influence of situational triggers and profound psychopathology. His career was short but devastating, characterized by a rapid escalation from minor, unpunished violent felonies to a concentrated homicidal spree in North Tulsa, Oklahoma between 2006 and 2007. The initial crimes demonstrated opportunistic reactive violence, while the final heinous acts against the Hobbs family introduced calculated witness elimination, sexual sadism, and the rare pathological phenomena of necrophagia. The analysis of Anderson's history serves as a critical example of how systemic failures in early intervention and enforcement can enable the development of high risk violent offenders. His case highlights the vital need for robust forensic psychological assessment in cases involving bizarre or post mortem pathological behaviors to understand fully the intersection of psychopathy and profound mental disorganization. Anderson's crimes remain a stark illustration of the destructive power of localized, opportunistic serial homicide magnified by extreme, uniquely documented sadism. And that concludes this episode of Homicide Cases as I close the file on Joshua Anderson. Join me next time when I will be opening the file on Steven Anderson. This is Misfit signing off, and as always, stay safe.